Hey guys, in this crash course, we're going to take a look at Git. Now, by no means is this a complete in-depth course where we're going to go over every command in every situation. This is meant to be a no-nonsense guide for beginners. So either new or intermediate programmers or developers that either don't know what Git is or have used it briefly but still don't really grasp the full concept. All right, so we're going to start out with a couple slides and then we'll jump in and we'll look at some of the most important commands for you to know. All right, so let's talk about what Git is. It's a version control system for tracking changes in computer files. All right, so it was initially created in 2005 by Linus Torvalds, who was also the creator of Linux. There's no specific language or framework or anything that you need to use Git. You can use it for static HTML websites, Node.js apps, Python, Java, C#, anything at all. It just stores files. So Git is a distributed version control system or decentralized version control system. And what that means is that many developers can work on a single project without having to be on the same network. Okay, so there's also version control systems that developers actually need to be on the same network to use. That's not what Git is. It's distributed or decentralized. Okay, Git coordinates work between multiple developers and it tracks every single version and every single change that's made on the system or in the project. You can also revert back to specific versions of any file at any time as long as it was committed to the repository. Usually when you use Git, you'll have a repository on your local machine that you work on, you make changes, and then you upload it to, or you push it to a remote repository. Okay, so something like GitHub or Bitbucket, and then you can push your local repository to the remote one. You don't need an internet connection to work on a repository locally, and you can make changes, but if you want to push it to the remote repository, you will need an internet connection. All right, so let's quickly look at some of the concepts of Git. So it essentially keeps track of your code history with snapshots of your files. All right, so you make these snapshots by making a commit with a simple command. And you can always go back to see any snapshot of previously written code. And like I said, you can always revert back if you need to. So your code is extremely safe when you're working with Git. You can put your code in a staging area before actually doing the commit and writing to the snapshot. This is done with the simple add command. Okay, and I'll go over all the important commands. Once you make a commit to a remote repository, other developers can then pull that information onto their machines. Okay, so you can also create branches, but we'll get into that in a little bit. All right, I'm trying to just really stick to the basics here. Okay, so let's look at the basic commands that you'll need to learn. So git init will initialize a Git repository. So you go into a folder via your command line or terminal, and you do git init, and it'll create a .git folder in that project. Okay, and it's hidden by default. You almost never need to go into this folder. At least I never have. All right, and then once you initialize that folder as a repository, you can then start to run other commands. All right, so git add will add the file or files that you specify to the staging area or the index, and they'll then be ready for commit. You can run this command as many times as you need to before committing, and it'll just keep the files in that staging area. So if you want to see what you have in the staging area and ready for commit, you can just use git status, and that'll display paths it'll display the differences between the working tree and then the staging area or the index. All right, so when you're ready, you can go ahead and commit your files. So you run git commit, and that'll take everything that's in the index or the staging area and put it into the local repository. There's also some important flags that you need to know, or options that you need to know with git commit, but I'll get into those a little later. All right, so the next three commands that I'm going to show you have to do with remote repositories. So if you're working with GitHub or Bitbucket, something like that. Okay, so git push will take your local repository that you've created and then push it to a remote repository such as GitHub. You will have to add, for instance, GitHub or another remote service. You'll have to add that, and you'll have to add your credentials. So it'll ask for your password and so on. You can also create SSH keys with GitHub so that you don't have to add passwords or anything like that. So if you want to pull the latest changes from a remote repository, you can just do git pull. All right, so if someone makes a change and you want the latest version, you can use pull, use the pull command. And then git clone will copy a remote repository into your current folder. So if you find a program or a project or module that you like on GitHub, you can simply clone it and that'll download it to your machine. So installing Git is pretty easy no matter what system you're using. If you're using Linux, it's a simple package command. For Debian, use apt-get. For Fedora, use yum. And if you're on a Mac, you can go to this URL right here, this Git SCM, and you can download Git. I believe you can also use Homebrew or some package manager or something like that. And then for Windows, there's a few different programs you can use, but I'd always suggest this git-scm.com. You can download the installer and you can set it up really easily. So this also comes with a tool called Git Bash, which is a command line tool, and it gives you a more Linuxy environment on Windows. I almost always use that tool over the standard Windows command line. Now there is graphical tools that you can use where you don't need to use commands, but I would strongly recommend that you use the commands because if you only use the GUI, the GUI, you're not really learning anything. You're not really learning how Git works under the hood. And if you end up somewhere where you don't have that tool, you're going to be lost. And it's not like it's really hard. If it was really difficult, then maybe I'd say, yeah, use that. But it's not hard at all. All right, at least for the basics. It can get complicated to really know how it works internally. But for things that you're going to need it for, most likely you're not going to need to know everything. Okay, and it's pretty simple. All right, so that's going to be it for the slides. Let's go ahead and jump in, and I will show you how Git works. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started and install Git. Now, I'm in Windows. If you're on Windows or Mac, you want to go to git-scm.com. And if you're on a Mac, you can click on this link right down here. And that'll take you to the download page for a Mac, for OS X. But we're going to go ahead and click Download on Windows, and that's going to start the download. And again, if you're on Linux, you can use your apt-get or your yum package manager, whatever it is you use. Okay, so let's go ahead and open this up. And we'll click yes. So it's just a standard Windows installer. We're just going to click through. Program files is where it'll be stored. I'm going to choose the default for those. Now this option here, I always choose the last one, which is use Git and optional Unix tools from the Windows command prompt. So it just gives us some extra commands to use. So I always choose that option. And then the rest of these line ending conversions, I'll just leave the default. Terminal emulator, we'll just use that default. And we'll keep enable file system caching, credential manager, that's fine. And that's good. Okay, and we don't want to use this experimental tool. So click install, and it'll install it on your system. Okay, so once that's done, we're going to uncheck release notes, and let's do launch Git Bash. Okay, click finish, and then this is the Git Bash tool that they give you. So I would definitely suggest using this over the standard Windows command line. So now if we say git -- version, you'll see the version you have. Yours may be different. And then you can also use this from within the standard command line. So if we go cmd and we open up the Windows command line and say git -- version, it should also work. Okay, so you can use Git from either one. Now what I'm going to do is create a project. So let's see, I'm on my desktop. I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm just going to call this my app. What we put in here doesn't really matter. So when you have Git Bash, you can also go ahead and right click and do Git Bash here, and that'll open up a window there as well. Alright, so I'll just use this one. And you can hold control and scroll, and you can make this bigger or smaller, which is nice. Okay, so what we want to do first, let's open this up as well. Kind of have both of these open at the same time. Okay, so what I want to do is just create a couple files that our project would have. So let's say touch index.html, yeah, or you could use your file manager. And let's create an app.js. Okay, so we have these two files that this is our application. And what we want to do is let's open up, I'm going to open up Atom, which is the text editor that I'm using. Okay, we'll move this over here. And I'm just going to add that folder as a project. So desktop, my app. And let's close this stuff up. And let's just open up index.html. And we'll just put, standard HTML tags in here. Put a title. And body. We'll just say, this is my app. Okay, we'll save that. And now what I want to do is I want to initialize this folder as a Git repository. So to do that, we just want to say git init, okay, for initialize. Now once we do that, it's going to create a .git folder in your directory. Now we can't see it here because I'm on a new Windows installation and I don't have hidden files enabled. So what you want to do if you're not seeing it here is go to View, Options, and then change folder search options. Go to View and then Show Hidden Files. I'm also going to uncheck Hide Extensions for known file types because I want the extension to be shown all the time. So let's say Apply, OK, and now you'll see there's a .git folder. Now this stuff in here, don't worry about that at all. That's just the Git files. I don't even know what half the stuff means, so we're not going to look into that. There's no reason to. So now we have this initialized as a Git repository, so we can start to use Git commands. Now, one thing you should do before you start anything is you want to add your name and email address to Git. So to do that, use the config command. So git config -- global, and then we're going to do user.name, and then in quotes just put your name. Okay, and then we're going to do the same thing for the email, so we'll just change name right here to email and then just put in your email. Okay, so now that that's set up, let's go ahead and let's create or let's add the index.html file to our Git repository. So to do that, we can say git add and then index.html. Alright, so it doesn't tell us anything when we do that, but if we want to check to see what's in the staging area, we can do git status. Okay, that's a command we're going to use quite a bit. And what this is telling us is that the index file has changes to be committed and that we've added it to the staging area. And then app.js is a file that's untracked. Okay, so it's telling us to add it. So if you want to remove, for instance, index.html from the staging area, you can do git rm. So let's go ahead and do that. So if we say git rm and we want to add the -- cached option and then index.html. Okay, and now if we do git status, you'll see that both files are now untracked. Now there's different ways you can add files. For instance, we could say git add, and we could use a star or asterisk and say .html. And what that'll do is it'll add any HTML files to the staging area. So now if we say git status, you'll see that it added the index file. It also would have added any other HTML files that we had. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and take the index out again with the rm command. and then I'm going to show you how to add everything. Okay, so if you want to add every file, you can say git add dot, and now if we say git status, you'll see that both the index and the app file are in the staging area. Okay, so we haven't committed them yet. What I want to do is edit one of these files, so we'll go over to index.html, and I'm just going to put in an exclamation here and then save. And then if we go and we say git status, you can see we now have this changes not staged for commit index.html. So this means that we've added some kind of change in the file while it was in the staging area. So it's telling us to go ahead and add it. So we'll say git add all again, and then git status, and now you can see that it's back in the staging area. Alright, so now we're going to do a commit. So for that we say git commit. Now there's an option that I would always suggest you use, but I'm going to show you without it first. So if we say git commit, it's going to go ahead and open up this Vim editor, which can be a little confusing because if you start to type, it's not going to do anything. What you need to do is click I to go into insert mode, and now I can type. Okay, so I'm just going to say initial commit. Actually, I'll just go uncomment it down here. These number signs are basically comments. Okay, so anything that has a number sign in front of it is treated as a comment. So I'm just going to remove it from this initial commit, and that gives us a comment of initial commit. Okay, now to get out of this, we want to do escape, which takes us out of insert mode, and then we want to type in :WQ and enter. And now you'll see that those files have been committed, and it tells us how many files have changed, and it gives us the file names. Okay, so that's how you do a commit. So if we were now to say git status, it says nothing to commit because we've already committed all of our changes. If we were to go edit a file now and do git status, it'll show us again which files are in staging and which files are unchanged. Alright, so let's go ahead and edit the app.js file. I'm just going to do console.log, and we'll just say hello. Save it. So now if we do, wow, this is slow machine. Git status. So that's been modified, app.js. Now I'm going to go ahead and add it with git add all. Alright, now I want to do a commit, but I want to show you how we can skip that whole edit stage. So we can say git commit and then add -m and then do our comment here. So we'll say changed app.js and enter. Okay, so now it's made that commit and it's skipped that whole editing stage. We just included the comment within that command, okay, using -m. Alright, so now what I want to do, let me clear this out. I want to show you how to use git ignore. So this is a file that we can include the files or folders that we don't want to include in our repository at all. So even if we do git add dot, where it adds everything, it's not going to add that. So let's create it. We'll say touch dot git ignore. Now if you try to create this file in Windows in the file manager, you probably won't be able to because it starts with a dot. So it's going to look at it as an empty name. So either do our touch command, or you can create it inside of an editor, I believe. Alright, so what we want to do is open up git ignore, and we're also going to create a file that we wouldn't want to include. So let's say, let's say touch, and we'll create a log.txt. Usually you don't want to include log files. So let's add something to this. We'll just say error logs, and we'll save that. And let's go into git ignore, and we'll say log.txt and save. That's all you have to do is add the file name. Now if we go over here and we say git add all and then git status, you can see the only file that's in the staging area that's changed is git ignore. Normally log.txt would be there because we just changed it, but since we added it to git ignore, it's not going to get added. Okay, you can also add entire directories. So let's say we have We'll say dir1. Oh man, this is slow. And let's do dir2. And inside these, I'm just going to create, let's say, new file and app1.js. And let's see, inside dir2, we'll create a file called app2.js. And we'll just add something to those. Okay, we'll just put that. I'll copy it. And we'll also put that in app1. Okay, so if we go to git ignore, and let's say that we don't want dir2 included at all. So we could just put in /dir2. Whoop. Okay, and save that. And let's go over here and we'll go git add all, and then git status. And notice that only dir1 is in there. Even though dir2 has a file that we changed, it's not in there because we added the whole folder to git ignore. All right, you could even add, you could say star.txt, and it'll withdraw all text files. Okay, and there's other expressions you can do as well. I'm not going to go through all of them. It's all in the documentation, but just know that if you don't want something included, you want to use git ignore or .git ignore. All right, so let's close these out. And the last thing I want to look at before we look into remote repositories is branches. All right, so let's say that you're a developer working on a project with a bunch of people, and you're assigned the task of adding a login. Okay, so you don't want to start making changes and push to the repository and have the main code base edited and changed without finishing the functionality. Okay, so what you would do is you could create a branch called login or whatever, and then work in that branch, and you can still commit it and all that, but it's not going to be committed to the main branch, okay, which is called master. You can see right here when we say git status, it tells us we're on the master branch. Now to create a branch, we can say git branch, and let's just call this my branch. All right, actually we'll just call it login. All right, we'll pretend we're adding some login functionality. All right, now just doing that doesn't change us to the branch. If I say git status, it still tells us that oh, I didn't commit these changes, so let me just commit these before we go ahead and switch branches. So we'll say git commit -m, and I'll just say another change. Okay, so you'll see that got committed to master because we're not in that the login branch. So to switch, we can say git checkout and then the name of the branch. Okay, so now we're in the login branch. So I'm going to clear that out, and then I'm going to say git, or not git, let's go ahead and create a new file while we're in this branch called login.html. Okay, so over here, let's go into login, and we'll just say whatever, doesn't matter, login, and save. And let's also edit index.html. So I'm just going to add down here, I'm just going to say login form, and save. Okay, and then let's say git add all, and then let's commit it, commit -m, and we'll say login form. Okay, so now let's go ahead and switch back. Now when I do the switch, watch the login HTML. So git checkout master, and now the login HTML file is gone. And if we look at index.html, that part of it that we edited is also gone. So the reason for that is because that's in the login branch. Now if we want to merge that, if we finish the functionality and we're ready to merge, then we can say, while we're in the master, git merge, git merge login. All right, so it's going to open this editor up. So let's do I, and let's see, please enter a commit message to explain why this merge is necessary. So we'll say added login, and then we'll do escape :WQ, enter. Okay, so now, even though we're in the master branch, we can now see the login HTML. Okay, now there's a lot more to branching and merging if you want to get more complicated, but I want to keep this simple for beginners. There's a good chance if you're working on your own projects that you won't even use branches. All right, so let's go ahead and now work with a remote repository. So I'm going to go to GitHub. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just sign in. If you don't have an account, just create one. It's obviously free. Okay, so what we want to do is go up to create new repository, and I'm just going to call this my app sample. You can call it whatever you'd like. Put a description. Just say sample app for tutorial. Okay, so you have the option of public or private. So public, anyone can see it. You can choose who can commit. Private, you can choose who sees it and commits. And I believe private costs money. I'm not sure. I've never actually tried to create a private repository on my account. And you can also choose to initialize it with a README file if you want. I'm just going to leave that unchecked. You can also choose to add a git ignore, which we already have, or a license. So let's go ahead and click create repository. All right, and then it'll take you to that page, which has nothing in it. So it's just giving us this message here, and it tells you exactly what to do. Okay, so you want to initialize your directory, which we've already done. It's telling us to add a README, but you don't have to. But you probably should, especially if it's a public repository, because you want to add some information on your application, and you want to use .md for it to be able to display nicely on the page. Okay, and MD is Markdown. Now it's telling us how to make a commit, but we don't actually have to do this stuff. What we want to do is add this repository as a remote repository. If we go over now, we say git remote. That'll list the remote repositories, which we have none. So let's go and copy this, and we'll paste that in here, run it, and then let's say git remote. And it'll say origin. So down here, what we want to do is git push and then -u origin master. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll just copy this. Okay, we'll paste that in. And that should push it to that repository. Oh, yeah, okay. So we do have to log into GitHub. It has to validate your credentials. Let's see, traversy.com, and password. Okay, so now it's going to push to the repository, to the master branch, and let's reload this, and now you'll see we have our files here. All right, and then down here it says help people interested in this repository understand your project by creating a README. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll say touch readme.md. All right, and we can open that up. Oops, I clicked the wrong editor. It's going to open up VS Code. Okay, so let's open up the README. And I'm not going to go through the syntax of Markdown. It's pretty easy if you want to just look at the documentation. But we're going to put a heading by using a number sign here. And we'll just say my app. This is my app. And we'll save it. Let's go ahead and add it, and then we'll commit, say commit, and we want to add -m. Comment will say added readme. Okay, so right now it's on our local repository. We haven't actually pushed it yet. If I reload, you'll see it's not there. So now that we've added that as a remote repository, all we have to do is say git push, and it'll push it right to GitHub. Okay, so now if I reload, you'll see we have the README file, and it's actually displayed here. Now, if someone wanted to get this, they could just clone it. Okay, if we go to clone or download right here, they could choose to download it as a zip, or they could clone it using this. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that link, and then let's create another folder, and we'll just call it my app 2, and let's open up Git Bash here, and then what we want to do is say git clone, and we'll just paste that link in, and it's going to pull everything in. Now okay, so what it does is it actually creates the folder for you, my app sample, so it pulls the entire folder in. But if we open that up, you can see we have the entire application here. Okay, and you can clone anybody's project as long as it's public. Now, if you had multiple developers working on it and someone else made a change, and we want to go over here back to our original folder, you could just do git pull, and that would pull everything down, and you can see everything's up to date. Okay, I think that's as far as I want to go into this. We covered all the basics, all the basic commands you need to start using Git. I would suggest, if you're not using it, at least now start to create your repositories for your project. Create a GitHub account if you don't have one. Create the repositories on GitHub, and then push from your local machine to the GitHub repository. All right, and you don't even have to use branches and stuff. You know, you're just starting out, just getting used to it. All you really need to do is add in commits and push. Okay, so hopefully this helped some of you guys. I'm sure some of you already know all this stuff, and hopefully you just used it as a refresher or whatever. All right, so that's it. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, and I'll see you next time.